Hello lovely people, I'm Debs. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Raina Reads Stuff. I am here in the book shack. It's a nice sunny, very cold day. I am going to do part 2 of the questions and answers to commemorate going over 1,000 subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you once again for submitting questions. I've still got a lot of questions to go, but it occurred to me that I missed one answer yesterday, and that was from James at Quaint and Curious Volumes, who asked me how big the book shack was. It's 6 by 10, so it's 6 foot wide, 10 foot long. Sort of quite sad I didn't go for a bigger one now, but the more space I've got, the more I'm going to fill it up with books, so it's probably best. Right, shall we get on to the rest of the questions? Jim at Mystery and Mayhem asked me what advice I would give to a 20-year-old Debs, and is there anything I would do differently? I think I would tell 20-year-old me to grab life by the throat and go for it. I could say that I want to rectify any mistakes that I made, but I wouldn't be me if I hadn't made them and learned something from them, or not, as the case may be. But yeah, I'd say dance in the rain, follow your dreams, just appreciate the little things and be happy. Life's too short not to be happy. Right, here's a question from Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. Greg says, if I could go back in time and convince a modern author not to write, who would that be? Well, people who are regulars on my channel will know that I take part in a lot of reading events and I throw myself into them wholeheartedly. I was very honoured last year to be asked to be a co-host of Garb August. Garb August is created by Criminoli, and he comes up with a bingo card. Now, this is the bingo card from last year, and whenever I see a bingo card, I feel compelled to fill the whole thing in. It has on here just the top line: drugs, killer kids, sexy vamps, kinky sex, ninjas. So these are not the types of books I normally read, I have to confess. So I googled them, and I am here to say, Misty Vixen, I am not for 1 minute presuming that that's your real name. Go and be a car mechanic or a bus driver or a pharmacist or anything other than an author, because Goblin Girls Do It Better didn't do it for me. In fact, it was hideous. I think it was Roy at Roy Reads Anything who was describing the books with sex in them on their level. I think it was his level of squelchiness. Much too squelchy. None of that. And the other thing is that my Kindle is still after all this time offering me the Goblin Girls Do It Better 2, or even 3. Apparently there's loads of them. None of them should have been written. So that's my answer. My lovely friend Pat, Book Chat with Pat, says that I take part in a lot of booktube events, which have been my favourite. And then Angela Luz 405 also asked me which event resulted in me finding new favourite authors or books. So I love the book events, and I look at them as a way of introducing myself to perhaps readers or genres that I don't normally do. So among my favourites, Michael K. Vaughan's June on the Range, and also Rocket Summer. So June on the Range is westerns, Rocket Summer is science fiction. Garb August, because I've read some weird and wonderful things during that. Victober, I love. That's organised by Katie Lumsden. MJ's Occult Detective October. Then at Revenant Reads, his Historathon, year-long reading events, are the reason I joined BookTube in the first place. Last year, he introduced a new event called The Ghosts of Christmas Past, and I absolutely loved it. Again, I was very honoured to be a co-host, as I am, of Historathon. And the other one, I'm not sure whether it's happening this year, but I really enjoyed last year, Spring into Adventure. That was organised by Jim at Mystery and Mayhem and Mark at Book Time with Elvis, among others. I was also a co-host on that. I loved that. I thought it was fabulous. In answer to Angela's question, I would say it was probably June on the Range that encouraged me to find a new genre and new authors, which I absolutely love. I don't think I'd read westerns before. I don't know why. I just hadn't. I now have a lot of and read Zane Grey, Louis L'Amour. Last year for June on the Range, I read Shane, I read Ombre, I read True Grit, Butcher's Crossing, and I've absolutely fallen in love with the genre. So thank you, Michael K. Vaughan. Right, back to Pat's questions. Are there genres I do not like or avoid? I don't tend to read romance books, not if they're exclusively romance books. If there is a romance in a book, like, I don't know, some big family saga or something, that's fine. I certainly don't read category romance unless it is Garb August, and that is normally one of the prompts or on the bingo card. So for that month, one time only, I will read category romance. The other thing I don't tend to read so much, I do like non-fiction works. I tend to read history, travel writing, politics, biographies, that sort of thing. What I don't read is science. I'm not very scientific. I've always been an arts and humanities type of person, but I've decided that I ought to push myself to read a little bit wider than my comfort zone, and so science books may well be on the menu this year. Pat says, you've travelled a great deal. What is your best trip and where would you like to go next? So I think my most memorable trips, one was to Albania. I had no idea what to expect from Albania. I found it beautiful. We went to a place called Trent where they had unbelievably well-preserved Roman ruins, and you could see out across the sea. You could see roads. We stayed in Tirana. We visited castles. The mountains are majestic, but everywhere there was evidence of the previous regime in the Hodja. Pillbox gunposts and things like that. We even went to a cocktail bar that was made out of an old machine gun post. And the other one was Iceland. Iceland, I just thought, was spectacularly beautiful. We went in February. There was snow everywhere. The air is so clean, and the light is different from here. it had a purity about it which made taking photographs, which is something I really enjoy doing, just marvellous. And it's so small. But, you know, you've got black sand on volcanic beaches. You fly over a dead volcano as you fly into the airport at Keflavik. It's just a magnificent country and the people are wonderful. Where would I like to go next? I have had a long-term wish to travel the Silk Road. I don't know what I find most fascinating about it, but I would really like to do it. I read, like I say, I enjoy travel books. I've read several about the Silk Roads, and Peter Frankopan's history of the Silk Road is really good, but I would love to travel the Silk Road. I would also like to see Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Finally, Pat asks, discovering poets. I'm looking more at poetry, which was something I tried desperately to avoid when I was at school. I've been reading, Pat sent me some lovely poetry books. I've also been reading some anthologies to see what I like and what I dislike. And going through, what was I? Oh, Seamus Heaney and Ted Hughes edited The Rattlebag. And in that, the poems are ordered by alphabetical order of title. So you don't know who you're going to come up against. And several times I was reading a poem and thought, I really like this. Many of those times the poem was by Thomas Hardy. So I'm going to have a look for more poetry by Thomas Hardy. I also have fallen in love with the poems of Wendell Berry, and that's because Pat sent me a book of his poetry and I just thought it was beautiful. Those are more nature orientated. And finally, there's a guy who comes from Nottingham, where I live, called Henry Normal, and he started life as a poet but then became a scriptwriter and producer, and he's very well known for writing and producing comedy shows in the UK. His poems, a lot of them are funny, but some of them are funny, but there's a hidden emotion in them. And I've met him a couple of times when he's come here. We have a poetry festival in Nottingham, and when it's on, he has, for the last couple of years, come and to give poetry readings as free of charge at local libraries, which is just lovely. And he's a great bloke. Right, Justin at Triumphal Reads wants to know, what animal do I like most? Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to have a pig, and I was going to call it Elliot. I'd still quite like to have a pig, but it would have to be a small pig. There is no room in my house for a large pig. Also, I like goats, and I'm thinking a pygmy goat to chew my lawn, to save me having to mow it, would just be lovely. I love the way they bounce. They're very bouncy little goats, and they just look as though they're having so much fun. But probably my favourite is the panda. I can't see any useful purpose at all for the panda other than to fool around and entertain people. I just think they're wonderful and ridiculous, and I love the definition of their colouring. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you know, with a lot of animals, you get the slow grading of changes of colours, but theirs is either black or white, a bit like a zebra, but zebras aren't so cute. So yeah, I'm going to say panda. Right. Claire Potter, who is a lovely friend and commentator on my channel, and Pat both asked, how did I get started in my career and what did I enjoy about my job? I was very lucky, very, very lucky in my career. I was told at school that I had to go somewhere on work experience, and we had to do that for 2 weeks. We could either sort our own work experience out or the school would send us somewhere. My mother, who it turns out is remarkably intuitive, decided that I might get on well working at a local paper. So I contacted a paper called the Bracknell News and Julie spent 2 weeks there, and I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with being in a newsroom. From there, I worked for them free of charge, just as like an intern during school holidays. And then I had just left school and started at college. So I had completed our first set of exams in the UK, were then O-levels. I completed those and I had just started college to do A-levels when a vacancy came up at the Bracknell News. And the editor didn't ask me if I wanted a job. He contacted my parents and asked them to go in and have a chat with him and asked their permission for me to start work there. And he did that because I'd only just turned 17 and I'd only just started my A-level course. Luckily, my parents said yes. So I was taken on a full apprenticeship for 3.5 years at the Bracknell News. The editor, George, told me once that he'd decided that was probably the quickest way of getting rid of me, by offering me a proper job and giving me a full-term apprenticeship, because then I'd leave. And if he hadn't given me a job, I would have continued to go in at weekends and holidays and bug them. So yes, thanks to him and my parents, I started very early without any qualifications. And from there I moved to a weekly paper in the suburbs of London. I was responsible for the Chiswick and Brentford Gazette. And after that, I started working at a paper called the Aldershot News. These were all weekly papers. Now, the company that the Aldershot News belonged to was bought out and then bought out and then bought out, and I ended up working for this big organisation that was, the flagship paper was the Daily Mirror, and I went from being a senior reporter to a news editor to an editor, and then I headed up production. And we took on, you know what it's like with a lot of places over, you know, the last 15 years. Staff numbers are reduced, workload is increased. I ended up being the group production editor for 27 weekly papers and a daily paper. And the daily paper was the Cambridge News. And we had weekly newspapers that went from well, we went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 counties in the south and southeast, plus some weekly papers in London. I loved the journalism, I loved the banter, I loved the teamwork of a newsroom. Had a bit of a love-hate relationship with advertising reps, especially when I was group production editor, because I needed them to be able to do basic things like divide by 4. When you print a newspaper, you think print 4 pages on one sheet that then gets folded in half. If they wanted an advertising supplement, I needed it to be divisible by 4. I've lost count of the number of people who have come to me and said, we're going to have an advertising supplement, it's going to be 9 pages. Can you divide 9 by 4? Yes. No, you can't. Please go away and reassess. But in those early days of local journalism, you could sort of feel you were making a difference. I can remember as a junior reporter, there was this big deal about a development that was, there were badgers, there was a big badger set on the land that the developers wanted to build on. And the developers were absolutely adamant that there were no badgers in it, and a little group of people in this small, very small village formed a protest group, and a photographer and I were down there one day and we spotted some workmen, and we sort of hid behind trees and followed them and caught them pouring some sort of noxious substance down the holes of this badger set. We had photographic evidence. We took it to the developers, we took it to the council, and the area became protected. And the Binfield Badger Group made Mike and I lifetime members in recognition. They're only small things, but I still think local newspapers can make a difference to a local community if they're done properly. As I climbed higher up the hierarchy, my job became less about journalism and more about making people redundant. And it was more about making people redundant that I didn't want them to be redundant. I wanted to keep the same number of staff. But I found myself having to make people redundant when I knew we couldn't do without them. I knew what their life circumstances were. I had worked with them for many years. They were friends. I found it tough. And at the beginning of COVID, when everyone was on furlough and the ones who weren't allowed to go on furlough were killing themselves to get newspapers out, our chief executive made an announcement that said that a lot of people, like 20% of the editorial staff across the country were going to be made redundant. And before he'd even finished his speech, I'm texting my boss going, let me go. And she did. So it was the right time for me to get out of that career, because it had stopped being what it was when I started. And I have absolutely no regrets. I had a fabulous career. And it was topped the year I left. The Cambridge News won front page of the year for a daily paper. in the National Newspaper Awards for a page that I'd designed. That was a great source of pride. Anyway, so that's how I got started in my career. And that's what I thought about it. And that's the end of the questions. So thank you once again for watching. Thank you so much for all your support. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you again soon. Thanks for the questions. I've really enjoyed doing this. Thanks for popping by. I will speak to you soon. Bye for now.